All right, I wasn't going to do a review on this fragrance, but since the last Calvin Klein fragrance I reviewed was a dud, a complete disappointment, Eternity for Men in Parfum concentration, and since I'm enjoying this one, I had to get a video out about it. This is CK1 Essence, and it comes in a Parfum Intense concentration, and it's totally improved upon the original CK1, which came out 30 years ago, and I wore back when it came out. So in today's review, I'm talking about CK1 Essence 2024 launch and how it compares to the original from 1994. If you're curious to discover it, then please stay tuned. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Sebastian, and I'm talking about CK1 Essence, the brand spanking new flanker of the original CK1 from Calvin Klein from 30 years ago. It's been 30 years. I can't believe it. 30 years ago this came out. It was a revolutionary fragrance, unisex targeted, very fresh tea and citruses and aromatics combined together. Very unisex, although I personally think it does lean more masculine than a feminine release, but it was a unisex targeted fragrance. The original was co-created between Alberto Morillas and Harry Fremont. The new version, they've only credited Alberto Morillas, so most likely he's the only one that worked on it. But it comes in two sizes. I have the 100 ml for $86. The sad thing is I don't see it selling at a lot of places, so it didn't get a really wide release. I don't know, maybe they're testing the waters to see if there are fans of it and they're going to release it, because Macy's has the original, but I wouldn't buy the original from Macy's. I would get it from the discounters because they're really inexpensive there. But it's $86 for 100 ml. Remember, it's Parfum Intense. It's an aromatic citrus fragrance featuring notes of green tea, vibrant bergamot, blood orange, natural sandalwood, upcycled musk. So the original fragrance featuring notes of pineapple, green notes, mandarin orange, papaya, bergamot, cardamom, lemon for top notes. Heart notes features nutmeg, violet, orris root, jasmine, lily of the valley, and rose. Finally, in the base notes, sandalwood, amber, musk, cedar, and oakmoss. So have they brought over the oakmoss into the new one? So it's interesting also, they credit a lot more notes for the original, and then the new version, it's not as many, but most likely there's a lot more that goes into the creation of this fragrance. And so they're only giving us a little guide to what is probably the most prominent notes in the fragrance. So in the end, to me, they're very similar in smell, but much more concentrated. It's much more intense than the original. The original has been reformulated and has been watered down. For me, it doesn't last. It's almost like I'm not saying it's identical, but like a 4711 fragrance. It's very light. You spritz it on after a shower for a clean smell, and it disappears after like 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours later. So it's extremely light. But with the new one, it has been intensified, and it has been giving a really potent effect to it. So it does last longer. I'm not saying it's beast mode. It's like an all-day thing. But for me, it's teetering around 5 to 6 hours. Maybe sometimes I got about 4.5, maybe sometimes pushing 6.5. But I do a lot more sprays than normal people do or usual. So I was extending the life of this one because I overspray. So, I am a fan of the original. I think it's an iconic fragrance. And again, I said revolutionary fragrance. But I've kind of gotten bored of the smell. But for me, when I was testing the CK1 Essence, it brought back a lot of memories of the mid-90s when things were really, really fun back then. I was in my early 20s, and I was wearing a ton of different fragrances, and fragrances back then were a lot different. And also, for an eau de toilette, it was a lot more potent than what we get now, especially the reformulated version. For me, I feel like the eau de toilette back then lasted longer than the Parfum Intense now. Can you figure that one out? It's crazy. But they used ingredients and fragrances back then that was a lot more potent and a lot more lingering. They had a major lingering power about it. But again, it's a great alternative to the original. I don't think you'll need the original anymore because the new version, the life is much more extended than the original. Maybe you get longer longevity than I do with the original, but for me, it's not very long lived. It's quite short lived, but definitely iconic and has a lot of history and meaning behind it. That's why I wanted to have it. I love the frosted bottle, and it just takes me back to that mid-90s days. But with the new one, the fact that it's got this kind of metallic silver bottle, I feel like the new version has gotten or smells a bit more synthetic. But because testing the two out side by side, for sure, the new one, the CK1 Essence in Parfum Intense Concentration, is a lot more potent, but there's a screechy metallic quality about it and also comes off synthetic, whereas the original smells naturalistic. Go figure that one out. If you can get past this, though, I think you'll be fine with the new CK1 Essence. Synthetics or not, I think it does smell similar, but when you keep testing a fragrance over and over again, a lot of things about it shine through, like you'll see things. And for me, side-by-side comparison, a wimpy CK1 EDT versus a hefty CK1 Essence, you'll notice how natural the original smells and how synthetic the new one smells. But once you get past the fact that it's synthetic, I think CK1 Essence can replace CK1 and EDT. Especially once this thing goes to the discounters, I try it. I don't know where you can go sample it, like if you wanted to sample it in person, because like I said, I don't see it at Macy's, but I see the original at Macy's. Maybe it's not online at Macy's, maybe it's in store. I haven't been to a Macy's lately to check, but it's selling at other locations. Like Amazon is one of the stores that sells this, and a few others that I don't remember like where. They're not very, like a Fragrance Net didn't have it, and those are the kind of discounters that I check. But once it goes there and the price is at least 50% less, I think it's going to be totally worth it, even though it has a lot of synthetics in there, and you'll notice them, especially when you're comparing the two side by side. Because for me, the most noticeable thing about the comparison of the two is not only EDT more wimpy and the CK1 Essence much more hefty, but CK1 EDT is a lot more realistic, naturalistic smelling in comparison to CK1 Essence. But it takes me back to the mid-90s. I had a great time. I was going to film school, art school, studying film and wearing a lot of fragrance, and a lot of these fragrances were stuff that I, dabbled in, bottle here and a bottle there. I was a big fan of Calvin Klein, and I loved a lot of the Calvin Klein fragrances. And prior to that, Escape was one fragrance that I was wearing outside of CK1. And of course, Eternity before that. And then, of course, before Eternity, it was all about obsession. So fragrances were an important thing for me, like they are now. But the designers had amazing, amazing fragrances. But thankfully, this is out. Even though I can get past the synthetic smelling things, I don't mind some synthetic smelling fragrances. It doesn't bother me as much. You'll notice it though. It's screechy, it's metallic, and I think it's the fact that the aromatics and citruses, when they combine together and the way they're combined, it comes off like that, especially also if there's a lot of woods in the base. I think that there's a pretty prominent sandalwood note in this, but I almost feel like there's also vetiver in here. So the woods, citruses, and aromatics together comes off very screechy to me. But, even though there's a prominent tea note in here, it's about green tea. There's supposed to be green tea in here, and I feel like some databases said there's also white tea, which the Calvin Klein website didn't say this. So I'm assuming it's overdosed with tea, and tea usually is soft, and sandalwood is also very, very soft and creamy, but I don't get that with this fragrance. It just comes off quite screechy. But when I go back to the EDT, it is coming off a very naturalistic, of course, as I said. The herbs just come to life for me in there. And with the CK1 Essence, the herbs don't come to life. And also the sandalwood in CK1 EDT, you can notice how creamy and smooth it is. But with the CK1 Essence, it's not. But again, I'm happy with the way this fragrance smells. And I like that it reminds me of my early 20s when I was wearing a lot of fragrances, especially Calvin Klein, and it totally takes me back when this fragrance launched. It was huge. It was huge when it came out, and Calvin Klein was at its height at that time. You know, they had the Marky Mark underwear ads prior to that and things like that. So Calvin Klein was, cranking out a lot of great clothing and underwear, and of course a lot of great fragrances. Sadly, nowadays they're not as good as I want them to be, especially with the fact that this was a complete dud. So disappointing when I was a really huge fan of the original and I was looking forward to something really, really unique, and the Parfum Eternity Parfum completely disappoints. But thankfully, this is still kept in a pretty good condition. The new version of CK1 Essence, I feel like they did a pretty good job with it, even though it smells a bit synthetic. Now I can only hope for an Obsession Parfum, and I'm looking forward to that because the original Obsession in its eau de toilette, I feel like has been kept a little better than the CK one, even Eternity. So I really like how Obsession smells nowadays, even after its multiple reformulations. And now I can only hope for a Parfum edition of Obsession. But from the meantime, we'll enjoy CK1 Essence. If you've gotten your nose on CK1 Essence, let me know. Put a comment down. And also let me know if you were a fan of the original CK1 and EGT. Did you wear it? I know there's a ton of different flankers around it. I didn't buy a lot of it. I never kept up with them. The only one that I have is CK1 Shock. It was a complete different fragrance. Nothing like the original CK1. But thankfully, we're back to the original here with CK1 Essence, and we can enjoy it. Anyway, thanks so much for watching today. Do let me know if you're a fan of the Calvin Klein fragrances CK1 and CK1 Essence. If you haven't gotten your nose on CK1 Essence, are you going to test it out? Do let me know, or are you going to skip this one out? Anyway, thanks again. Please like this video. Please share it. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and I'll be back with more videos very soon. Have a good one. Goodbye.